This is the start of a project to get the oral history of facilities management, and what we're going to be doing is a whole number of us are going to be speaking to people who were there in the early days and chatting about how really the whole thing kicked off, because it started from so many different routes.
Yes, it did.
So the first question I want to ask you is, if you look back now, when was the first time you heard the phrase facilities management, and what did it mean at that time?
Right. I will answer that, but I'd like to just twist it a little. The first time I heard the word facilities was because of the internal publication. Jane Bell was the editor at DGW.
Right.
And right from the start, I and others didn't like the word. You had to speak it with an American accent, really, for it to sound good.
Okay.
But this was a very superb, modest publication. And as you've alluded to earlier, before that it was always, from where I came from, so I came from the built environment side, it was always property management, premises management, but the word facilities, first I saw it, was as that title of the DGW internal documentation.
And do you remember roughly what year that would have been?
I know it was before 1988.
Okay.
Because I know what, from then onwards, when I began to be a little bit more involved, I've got more dates on things.
Right, okay. So at that time, what were you actually doing? What was your job at that time?
Well, as you know, I was at University College London. I was a senior lecturer, I think. I had been Vice Dean and Dean of the Faculty of Built Environment. And for a 6-year period, I was the founding director of their commercial business, exploiting intellectual property across UCL as a whole.
Oh, right. Okay.
In fact, medicine was by far the biggest part of this. Intellectual property around the world, setting it up. It's now a very large business. I only helped it in its birth, 0 to 4 million turnover. It's now a huge 40 million plus.
Yes. So another feather in your cap.
No, I don't know. I did it because architecture, because I'm an architect, for me was going in a direction I didn't quite like. In fact, it relates to facility management. When I was educated, user requirements, user participation was critical in the design and the briefing and the design of buildings. I was particularly involved in hospitals and laboratory buildings.
This was with John Weeks, wasn't it?
John Weeks, and my sort of real person was Richard Llewellyn-Davies, Lord Llewellyn-Davies, who was his senior partner.
Yes.
And this is where I met, through this sort of circle of people, who I met Frank Duffy for the first time. But it was all, let's make sure at least that the future users of buildings are able to adapt what they inherit and now I'd say manage it better into the future.
And what do you think is your greatest contribution as you look back now?
Well,
what would you say is your greatest contribution?
Not a lot, really. I think two things. I don't want to sound arrogant, may be relevant. They're all published anyway. First of all, in this order, before we ever met, I had done, I mentioned earlier, my homework, or tried to. And this really was looking at library sources, visiting key people. Particularly, I had approached over 50 senior practices about trying to get to grips to what is FM, or what could FM be.
Right.
And I was trying to develop a model curricula for, and I use the word plural on purpose, for FM courses. And this is published in facilities under, I forget what it's called, I know it's called Agenda for Education. And that became quite a seminal paper. So even when we had a working party on core competencies in the AFM, this was before that happened.
Yes.
But one of the contributions I think I made, and it's probably totally irrelevant today, things have changed, but the notion that you really ought to start focusing, defining, what you're about.
If you could do one thing differently
Yeah.
in your career around FM, what would it be?
I think probably my answer, it's a very difficult question actually, but I was probably
Okay.
in the early and middle days, because we were the new kid on the block, and I knew about the other big battalions around, big professions, I probably didn't, I wasn't firm and strong enough perhaps in pointing out the absolutely essential contribution of FM in securing, let us say, a more competitive national infrastructure, in securing much better support services, a very important political point at the moment.
Of course.
And the other thing I think that I didn't push in the BIFM enough the management component. And I do think that's a problem. I went on to the websites before us meeting today just to see what's happened. And, you get people, because of the recession, talking very strangely about what we've got to do is more for less. A very senior person said that. Do they realise that that's impossible? You can't do more for less. I mean, otherwise the laws of physics would be put aside. You can do, in a way, the same for less if there's gross inefficiencies in the system, but I would recommend you do things differently for less.
I was just thinking
That's
that.
the point. And,
yes.
So it is a political point at the moment.
Yes.
But that's why, I mean, in a way, I'm very sad to have been retired at this critical point, because I think what's happened in Britain, I haven't talked to any of my contacts in the States about it, but they must be having exactly the same, if not more severe, consequences. There's nothing like factors outside your control to act as a catalyst.
Absolutely.
To let you push things through that you wanted to anyway,
Absolutely.
but now you've got a real proper reason for doing it. You
Absolutely.
know? So that's what I would do.